barakatuh. Thank you for joining me for this live post in which I discuss Matthew's Gospel. Today we're dealing with Matthew chapter 8. And I'll pull up here Bible Hub and look at Matthew chapter 8. So which version of the Bible can we look at today so we get a sense of various versions that are out there and how they read? So let's say Contemporary English Version. That should be an interesting one, easy to read. So I begin reading from the Contemporary English Version, Matthew chapter 8, under the heading Jesus Heals a Man. I like the cross-referencing here. They give references to Mark and Luke as well, so we can easily locate the same pericope, the same incident in the life of Jesus in the other Gospels as well. Okay, so verse number 1. As Jesus came down the mountain, he was followed by large crowds. Suddenly a man with leprosy came and knelt in front of Jesus. He said, "Lord, you have the power to make me well, if only you wanted to." Jesus put his hand on the man and said, "I want to. Now you are well." At once the man's leprosy disappeared. Jesus told him, "Don't tell anyone about this, but go and show the priest that you are well. Then take a gift to the temple, just as Moses commanded, and everyone will know that you have been healed." So that's interesting. I want to cross-reference Mark chapter 1, verse 40, where this is also found, the same episode. So we go here, open another copy of Bible Hub, and I go Mark chapter 1, verse 40. And here it is. So we go to the same Contemporary English Version to see what is happening there, CEV. Okay. So what do you say, for verse number 20? Let me go back and look at what was that. It was chapter 1, verse 40. Oh, that's my bad. Okay. Chapter 1, verse 40. So in chapter 1, verse 40 of Mark's Gospel, it says, "A man with leprosy came to Jesus and knelt down. He begged to have the power. He begged, 'If you have the power to make me well, you have the power to make me well, even if you want, if only you wanted to." Jesus felt sorry for the man, so he put his hand on the man and said, "I want to, now you are well." Okay, so a similar thing in Mark's Gospel. So that's the cross-referencing that is there. And at once the man's leprosy disappeared. Jesus told him, "Don't tell anyone about this, but go and show the priest that you are well. Then take a gift to the temple just as Moses commanded, and everyone will know that you have been healed." So it's interesting here that Jesus is telling the man to go and take the gift to the temple, and that way people will know that he is healed. But notice that the person is also being instructed here to keep following the commands, just as in the book of Moses. So that is a given. People are following the book of Moses. Jesus is operating in a Jewish context. Jesus is a Jew, the man is a Jew, and they're continuing with Jewish rituals and observances. Then we come to Jesus heals an army officer's servant, verse number 5. We're still in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 8. When Jesus was going into the town of Capernaum, an army officer came up to him and said, "Lord, my servant is at home in such terrible pain that he can't even move. I will go and heal him." Jesus replied, but the officer I will go and heal him, Jesus replied. But the officer said, "Lord, I'm not good enough for you to come into my house. Just give the order, and my servant will get well. I have officers who give orders to me, and I have soldiers who take orders from me. I can say to one of them, 'Go,' and he goes. I can say to another, 'Come,' and he comes. I can say to my servant, 'Do this,' and he will do it." When Jesus heard this, he was so surprised that he turned and said to the crowd following him, I tell you, in all of Israel, I've never found anyone with this much faith. Many people will come from everywhere to enjoy the in the kingdom of heaven. And with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but the ones who should have been in the kingdom will be thrown out into the dark. They will cry and grit their teeth in pain. Then Jesus said to the officer, You may go home now. Your faith has made it happen. Right then, the servant was healed. So people are being healed, and it's a characteristic of these healings in the Synoptic Gospels that it is the faith of the persons who are causing them to be healed. Like they come, they have faith, and they're being healed, as opposed to when they do not have the faith. So in one episode, it is mentioned in Matthew's Gospel that Jesus did not do many mighty deeds in his hometown because the people were not believing. And in Mark's Gospel, in the same episode, it says Jesus could not do many mighty works there. He could not do any mighty works there because of the lack of faith in the people. So Jesus has faith in God, and the people have faith in God, and the combination of the two is making it possible for these healings to take place. So it's all being done by the will of God, as the Quran repeatedly affirms. Now, we come to a section in which Jesus heals many people. Verse number 14, still in Matthew chapter 8, verse number 14. Before I read, let me have a look at the chat and make sure that everything is going well. And I see that salam is here from Brother Akib, and mashallah from Brother Muhammad, and hello from Dennis. So thank you all for being here and for your kind comments. I'll come back and look at these comments in detail. And in the meantime, let me give thanks to the people who are sharing the stream. I see Abu Bakr has done that. Thank you, Brother Abu Bakr. May Allah reward you and bless you and all of the people around you. Okay, so I'll come back to your comments. Let me go back to the reading for the moment. So Matthew chapter 8, and we are at verse number 14. Jesus went to the home of Peter, where he found that Peter's mother-in-law was sick in bed with fever. He took her by the hand, and the fever left her. And then she got up and served Jesus a meal. Just a quick side comment about that. Peter had a mother-in-law, which obviously indicates that he was married. And so this calls into question the idea of celibacy in early Christianity, because the disciples of Jesus were obviously married. Well, Peter at least. Verse number 16, that evening, many people with demons in them were brought to Jesus, and with only a word he forced out the evil spirits and healed everyone who was sick. So God's promise came true, just as the prophet Isaiah had said. He healed our diseases and made us well. And then we come to another section, some who wanted to go with Jesus. Verse number 18, when Jesus saw the crowd, he went across Lake Galilee. A teacher of the law of Moses came up to him and said, Teacher, I'll go anywhere with you. Jesus replied, Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man doesn't have a place to call his own. Another disciple said to Jesus, Lord, let me wait till I bury my father. Jesus answered, Follow me and let the dead bury their dead. Now, of course, there is a filial responsibility to take care of your parents, especially. And, there are many responsibilities that people have at home. So is Jesus calling on his disciples to drop all responsibilities and just follow him? Well, this is how this story would appear. This could be justified if the end was expected to occur any time. But as we know, 2,000 years later, the end has not occurred. So what's going on here? It may be that... So the idea here of let the dead bury their own dead could mean that the people who are without faith, they are like dead. And, let those who are without faith bury the ones who are physically dead. But the ones who are going to follow Jesus, they are the ones who have faith. But does it mean that everyone who has faith has to drop everything and follow Jesus? So This it's a difficulty that people may have a good explanation for, but I cannot think of the reasonable explanation for this at the moment. And we come to verse number 23. So Matthew chapter 8, verse 23. I'm reading from the contemporary English version. After Jesus left in the boat with his disciples, a terrible storm suddenly struck the lake, and waves started splashing into their boat. Jesus was sound asleep, so the disciples went over to him and woke him up. They said, "Lord, wake up, save us before we drown." But Jesus replied, "Why are you so afraid? Well, you surely don't have much faith." Then he got up and ordered the wind and the waves to calm down, and everything was calm. The men in the boat were amazed and said, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Now it is interesting that in Mark's version, we do not have the people coming to this understanding as we see in Matthew's gospel. So Matthew has reworked the story. So let's go over to Mark, which is the story is in Mark chapter 4, verse 35 and onwards, if we follow the contemporary English version linking here. So let me go over to Mark chapter 4. And here we go. So a storm in verse number 35, Mark chapter 4, verse 35. Here how it sounds in Mark's gospel. That evening, Jesus said to his disciples, let's cross to the east side. So they left the crowd, and his disciples started across the lake with him in the boat. Some other boats followed along. Suddenly, a storm struck the lake. Waves started splashing into the boat, and it was about to sink. Jesus was in the back of the boat with his head on a pillow, and he was asleep. His disciples woke him and said, "Teacher, don't you care that we are about to drown?" So that's an interesting way of putting it. It looks like they're not so very polite towards Jesus. So I'm going to move this to a new window so that I can put it side by side with the other window in which I have marked Matthew chapter 8. I'm going to move that also to a new window so that I can have maximum flexibility in organizing it. Okay, so I have Matthew chapter 8, and side by side with that, I'm trying to place Mark chapter 4. Okay, good. So now we have them aligned. So in Matthew chapter 8, verse number 25. So the disciples went over to him and woke him up. They said, "Lord, wake us, save us before we drown." Think about how Jesus is being addressed there. And now compare that with Mark chapter 4, verse number 38. His disciples woke him and said, "Teacher, don't you care that we're about to drown?" So that's Mark. And Matthew again, "Lord, wake us, wake up. Lord, wake up, save us before we drown." So you see, this is a very different address. And then in Matthew's gospel, when he got up, he ordered the wind and waves, and everything was calm. Same in Mark's gospel. And then in Matthew's gospel, the men in the boat were amazed and said, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." So they come to an understanding that, at least they're surprised at Jesus, and they say the wind and the waves obey him. And in Mark's gospel, it is there as well. Now they were afraid, more afraid than ever, and said to each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." So we see that in the two Gospels, there is a contrast in the way that people are responding to Jesus. So in Matthew's Gospel, they are recognizing him as Lord, and they are expecting him to save them. Of course, the saving here is from the waves, not so much in the saving as saving from their sins. Okay. And now we come to verse number 28. So the two men with demons in them. After Jesus had crossed the lake, he came to shore near the town of Gadara and started down the road. Two men with demons in them came to him from the tombs. From the tombs. They were so fierce that no one could travel that way. Suddenly they shouted, "Jesus, Son of God, what do you want with us? Have you come to punish us before our time?" Not far from there, a large herd of pigs was feeding. So the demons begged Jesus, "If you force us out, send us into those pigs." Jesus told them to go, and they went out of the men and into the pigs. All at once the pigs rushed down the steep bank into the lake and drowned. The people taking care of the pigs ran to the town and told everything, especially what had happened to the two men. Everyone in town came out to meet Jesus. When they saw him, they begged him to leave their part of the country. So yeah, similar story is in Mark chapter 5. Many Muslims find this story to be a bit odd because if you take out the demons from the men, why would you put them in the pigs to let them destroy the pigs? But anyway, that's a difficulty that, again, some people may have an answer for, but I'm not aware of a reasonable answer for that. But let's see then. I'm puzzled about the contemporary English version rendering of this passage in Matthew's Gospel about the storm, because somehow I recall that there are versions in which it is said that when Jesus had actually calmed the storm, the men in the boat worshipped him. So where am I getting that from? Let me see if I can find that in a cross-reference. So Matthew chapter 8, verse 27. That's what I want. Matthew chapter 8, verse 27. In which versions is it like that? Verse 27. Okay, so they were amazed, marveled, marveled, amazed. What kind of man is this? What kind of man? Okay. See, my memory is not correct then. They were shocked, according to the Aramaic Bible. They were amazed, even the winds. What kind of man? Amazed. Yeah, it looks like that is yeah, that's how it is. So my memory was not quite correct about that. Okay, good. So anyway, let me have a quick look at your comments, and then if we have time, I'll go on to chapter 8. Well, chapter 8. I'll go on to chapter 9 as well, and we do chapter 9 as well today. Okay, so I see that a AAA apologist has also shared the stream. Thank you for that. And let me look at your quick comments quickly. So, Akib Zaman saying salam, wa alaikum salam. Brother Muhammad saying mashallah, and thank you for that, those uplifting words. And Dennis saying, hello Shabir, verse 22 is interesting. How is it meant that the dead should bury their dead? So when someone doesn't obey God, he is considered as dead. That's what I said too. But then the question that remained for me is, was that a reasonable sort of demand? Let the dead bury their own dead. So going back to the contemporary English version where we were. So they have a note here. They say, noted to verse 22, let the dead bury their dead. For the Jewish people, a proper burial of their dead was a very important duty, but Jesus teaches that following him is even more important. Of course, the question that still remains is that one could do both. You could be a follower of Jesus and still bury your dead. Um, so yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so Bashir Yusuf saying Salam alaikum, wa alaikum salam. And Jawad Dudu saying Salam Sheikh, I hope that you are doing well, inshallah. Yes, I am. Thank you very much. Actually, I want to know whether there were other Gospels written before the ones we have today. Why did they wait so long to write down the Gospels, namely Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John? I think the first gospel to be written was written some 40 years after Jesus left the scene. Can you elaborate on this, Ya Sheikh? So I think, Brother Jawad, I had a similar question recently because I remember answering something like this. But in case you hadn't been here when I did that, so basically, scholars try to answer that question by saying, well, it may have been that earlier on, people had the idea that the end is going to happen soon, so there was no real need to compile the sayings of Jesus and to recount his life and so on, because judgment is going to come upon us anytime. Jesus is going to return, so why do you need a gospel? So it's only with the passage of decades that people came to realize that, you have to preserve this knowledge and pass it on because it looks like life is going to go on for a while. But having said that, there is also mention of the gospel queue in scholarship, which would have been compiled some in the 50s. So maybe just after 2 decades of Jesus' being ascended into heaven. So the answer to that is not as clear as we might expect, but these are some possibilities. That's one possibility, that people did not expect that life will go on for so long. So at least those who believed in Jesus, they thought the end is going to happen soon. And so they didn't need to record a gospel. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Okay, Dennis, you asked about the reason why Jesus didn't allow the man to bury his father. Probably the father was not dead yet, yes. The funeral in that times often was on the very same day. So this man would not have been there if his father already had died. That part I don't quite understand. Funeral at times often was on the very same day, so that man would not have been there if his father had already died. He would be busy with burying his father. Oh, I see. So if the father had actually died, the man would have been busy with the funeral arrangements. He wouldn't have been in the presence of Jesus. Okay, so it seems very much as it was only an excuse. Okay. Yeah, but even if the man was just making an excuse, Dennis, you can see that the statement is general and it's for everybody. Like, let the dead bury their dead. And I took it in the first instance that the man's father was not dead yet. He probably means, let me stay with my father until my father dies, and then I'll bury him, and then I can, come and be your follower. If we compare that with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, calling people to go out in battles to defend the nascent Islamic community, he often gave excuses to people like who were just married, for example. They could stay with their bride. They gave allowances for people who had aging parents so that they can stay and serve their parents and so on. But in this case, it looks like Jesus was making a radical call, like you must drop everything and come, even to the extent that you can't stay to bury your father. Now, if this man had siblings, especially brothers, who would bury his father in his absence, then that would have been a mitigating factor. He can go follow Jesus. He knows that his brothers are there to take care of his father, including burying his father. But none of this is in the story, and Jesus' words are very general. Let the dead bury their dead. Which can be taken to mean, let those who are without faith bury the ones who are without faith. That may be a kind of meaning. So by comparison, we can see that in the Quran, the Quran says, even if you have disbelieving parents, وَصَاحِبْهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا, you should give them good and kind company, even in this world. Of course, in the life hereafter, you're all going to return to God, and God is going to judge you according to your, what you did in the world. But in this world, it is still our duty to our parents. Even if they are non-Muslim parents, we still have to serve them and make sure that they're buried respectfully, even if according to the dictates of another faith, if they have another faith. So. Yeah, don't worry about the typing mistake, Dennis. I recognize that. It's not a problem at all. Okay, so that's my humble take on that. So it looks like we have a little bit more time. So usually I allot an hour for this. Sometimes I finish earlier because I have pressing circumstances and I have to go. But today, I don't mind going on to doing chapter 9 as well. And it's good that we double up like this. Otherwise, it will take us a long time to finish Matthew's Gospel. And then we still have more to do, right? We have other Gospels and so on to look at, Luke and John, and especially John, because Luke will be very similar to Matthew and Mark. But John, we have to get to John eventually. Okay, so speeding through then, going to Matthew chapter 9 now. So Matthew chapter 9, Jesus heals a man who could not walk. Verse number 1, Jesus got into a boat and crossed back over to the town where he lived. Some people soon brought to him a man lying on a mat because he could not walk. When Jesus saw how much faith they had, he said to the man, "My friend, don't worry, your sins are forgiven." Some teachers of the law and Moses said to themselves, "Jesus must think he is God." But Jesus knew what was in their minds, and he said, "Why are you thinking such evil things? Is it easier for me to tell this man Is it easier for me to tell this man his sins are forgiven, or to tell him to get up and walk? But I will show you that the Son of Man has the right to forgive sins here on earth." So Jesus said to the man, "Get up, pick up your mat and go on home." The man got up and went home. When the crowd saw this, they were afraid. They praised God for giving such authority to people. So what's happening here is that Jesus says to the man, "Your sins are forgiven," and the people start thinking, okay, so it looks like he's making a claim only God could make. But he says, why do you have such evil thoughts in your minds? In other words, that's not what he meant, and he's explaining what he meant. So he is. What's easier, to say your sins are forgiven, or to say, pick up your mat and go home? So he says to the man, pick up your mat and go home. And then the crowd saw this. So they said, okay, now they realized that God has given such authority to people. So they realized that God gave the authority to Jesus to be able to do this. So that means that Jesus is not God. He is just one of the people to whom God has given such authority. In some versions it says, given to people on earth. So Jesus is not the only one to have received such authority. So from a Muslim perspective, Jesus does all of these bi'idhnillah, with the permission of God. And other prophets too could have been given authority to perform miracles. And that doesn't prove that the prophets are God. It just proves that they're human beings, but they're given such authority by God. Okay, now we come to verse number 9. So we're in Matthew chapter 9, verse number 9. I'm reading from the Contemporary English Version. As Jesus was leaving, he saw a tax collector named Matthew sitting at the place for paying taxes. Jesus said to him, "Follow me." Matthew got up and went with him. So now this name Matthew here has given a rise to the name of this gospel, the gospel according to Matthew. It seems that as time passed, people could not remember who wrote these gospels, and then they looked for some distinguishing characteristics, and they pinned this one on Matthew because Matthew's name is mentioned here. But notice that Matthew is here in the third person, so it's not like Matthew saying, "I was sitting at the tax collector's booth, and Jesus said to me, 'Come with me, Matthew,' and then I came." That would be clearly an indication that Matthew is the writer, but in this case, it looks like Matthew is in the third person. So, verse number 10. Later, Jesus and his disciples were having dinner at Matthew's house. Many tax collectors and other sinners were also there. Notice how he says many tax collectors and other sinners, as if the tax collectors are sinners. Now, of course, in a justified society, in a just society, a tax collector might be doing a reputable job. But in that society, because from the Jewish point of view, the tax collectors were collecting taxes on behalf of Rome, on behalf of a pagan government, they saw that as an evil activity, collecting taxes from the poor Jewish people. So tax collectors and other sinners. So verse number 11, some Pharisees also asked Jesus' disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and other sinners? And Jesus heard them and answered, healthy people don't need a doctor, but sick people do. Go and learn what the scriptures mean when they say, instead of offering sacrifices to me, I want you to be merciful to others. I didn't come to invite good people to be my followers. I came to invite sinners. Now, this is a paraphrased translation. It's not exactly word for word. So it smooths over difficulties and it makes the English sound good. And that's fine. It's good. It's easier to understand. So for Muslims who are not so familiar with the Gospels, you want to make a quick read, you're not stopping at every point and asking what does this mean, this would be an easier translation to read. As the title says, it's a contemporary English version. It's put into contemporary English, but it's also smoothed over, so it's not following the Greek, in terms of like word for word and that sort of thing in the way it translates. Okay. So this is an interesting passage here, verse number 13 in Matthew chapter 9. It is, it is not the sacrifices that God wants. So sometimes our Christian friends say, but look, after Jesus, all of the sacrifices stopped. And that's because Jesus died for the sins of the world. He became the sacrifice to end all sacrifices. But that would be a sacrifice that God still desires at the time when Jesus was saying this. But Jesus is quoting the Old Testament passage to say, look, it is not the sacrifices that God wants. He just wants you to be merciful to others. So naturally, we should expect then from this that God does not want Jesus to be sacrificed on the cross. And God wants to be merciful instead, just as he wants us to be merciful to others. He would naturally be merciful to people. And Jesus came to invite the sinners, meaning he came to invite them towards repentance and towards coming back to God. I want to make a quick note back to verse number 12 here, when Jesus says it's the healthy people, it's not the healthy people that need a doctor, but it is the sick people who need a doctor. So Jesus was associating with the sinners and the tax collectors because they're the ones who needed his message. And so that's an interesting thought. In Islamic tradition as well, we have it that there is a hadith actually that says that the righteous person who associates with the people in general and bears the fact that they are sinning, that's a better person than the one who recluses himself and doesn't associate with the people. The point can be seen here that if the pious people all recluse themselves, then they will leave society in their sins, and there'll be no one to preach to them. So those who are inclined towards faith, yes, sometimes you need to stay aloof to a certain extent. You need private time to pray to God, and it's just between you and God. You need other times to get your sanity in order. Otherwise, you associate with people who are sinning all of the time. You yourself might fall into sin. So you have to have enough time that will keep you on the straight and narrow, and then when you feel strong enough, you're fortified, that's when you can go out and give the message to others. But you have to associate with others. And it's not always that you're preaching to them. Sometimes it's by associating, mingling with the others, but of course not indulging in sin yourself, that you will get a chance to give them the message and draw them towards God. Okay. Now, verse number 14. We're in Matthew chapter 9, verse number 14, and I'll finish this and then come to your comments again to see if there are the comments and questions. So we don't have that much far to go. Okay, so verse number 14. Some followers of John the Baptist came and asked Jesus, "Why do we and the Pharisees often go without eating while your disciples never do?" That means we're fasting, but your disciples never fast. So here, the contemporary English version has, obscured the idea of what is meant by a fast. So going without eating is it's not so very clear that people are are doing a fast here. But that's what it is. So Jesus' disciples are not fasting. So Jesus is answering this question from the disciples of John the Baptist. The friends of a bridegroom aren't sad while he is still with them, but the time will come when he will be taken from them. Then they will go without eating. Well, it's being sad. It's not so much the point here, because elsewhere Jesus had said that when you fast, oil your hair and wash your faces so you do not appear before people as though you are deprived of food or anything like this. You don't appear weak and so on in the eyes of the people. That's not the point about being sad. If we take the bridegroom as an example, okay, so those who are with the bridegroom, they wouldn't be fasting because they would be rejoicing, they'd be eating and drinking and so on. Of course, drinking healthy and halal drinks. In the context of the bridegroom, you can see it that way. That so he's giving an example. Look, those who are with the bridegroom, they will eat and drink and they will rejoice. But when the bridegroom is taken away, that's when people might go back to fasting or whatever. So in a similar way, he's like the bridegroom among them, and they're not going to fast while he's with them. But after he goes away, they're going to fast. So there is another aspect to this, that the disciples of Jesus in those days, they had to go out far and wide and quickly spread the message of Jesus. So he was commissioning them, sending them out to go and deliver the message, at least within the context of the Gospels here. So when he is sending them out on missions, it is more appropriate that they don't fast at that time, because they're going out on a mission, they're going to travel. Even in Islamic tradition, there is an allowance for when people are, even during the month of Ramadan, instead of fasting on the days when you're traveling, you will eat on those days, but you fast an equal number of days later on, because you have the hardships of traveling. And the disciples are being sent out with meager resources to other towns to give the message. So it was not appropriate for them to fast at that time. Otherwise, they might be weak and unable to. They would lack the energy to deliver the message as it should be delivered. So that's the point. And obviously, after Jesus goes away, the disciples fast, and fasting is also known in Christianity. And when the Quran says, "Kutiba alaykum as-siyamu kama kutiba ala alladhina min qablikum," fasting has been prescribed for you, as was prescribed for those before you, we can see that there is evidence that the early Christians used to fast. Okay. So verse number 16 now of Matthew chapter 9, "No one uses a new piece of cloth to patch old clothes. The patch would shrink and tear a bigger hole. No one pours new wine into old wineskins. The wine would smell and burst the old skins. And then the wine would be lost and the skins would be ruined. New wine must be put into new wineskins. Both the skins and the wine will then be safe." Now, I'll make an interesting side comment here about the Islamic tradition. So, the Quran says a lot of good things about the Gospels and about the Bible as a whole. But at the same time, Muslims did not take the Bible and attach the Quran to it to give you like a 3-volume book, the Old Testament, New Testament, and Final Testament. In contrast with what the Christians did. The Christians adopted the Old Testament and they added to it the New Testament about Jesus. And so they have a 2-volume book, the Old Testament plus the New Testament. But Muslims did not go that route of going Old Testament plus New Testament plus Final Testament. You see, I don't have 3 hands, otherwise, I'd have 1, 2, 3. So the Quran is kept as a separate book. And as Muslims see it, the Quran rules over the previous books. So what the Quran says, that is the final word from God, and it's not dependent so much on what the previous Gospels or the Bible as a whole says, whether the previous testaments, whether the Old or the New Testament. So in a way, the Quran is not this new cloth is not patched onto the old garment. It is kept separate, as would be indicated by these sayings here. And now we come to this interesting story about the dying girl and a sick woman. Verse number 18 of Matthew chapter 9, reading from the Contemporary English Version. While Jesus was still speaking, an official came and knelt in front of him. The man said, "My daughter has just now died. Please come and place your hand on her. Then she will live again." Jesus and his disciples got up and went with the man. Now, I want to make a side comment to Mark chapter 5 here, which is where the Contemporary English Version is indicating we should go if we want to see the comparative story in Mark's Gospel. It's Mark chapter 5. So I'm going to bring it up here. I've already got it aligned. I just need to go to chapter 5. And it's in verse number 21. So verse number 21, once again, Jesus got into the boat and crossed the lake. Verse number 21, yes. Then as he stood on the shore, a large crowd gathered. The person in charge of the synagogue was also there. His name was Jairus. And when he saw Jesus, he came over to him. He went over to him. He knelt at Jesus' feet and started begging him for help. He said, "My little daughter is about to die. Please come and touch her so she will get well and live." So notice that he says here in Mark's Gospel, the girl is about to die. About to die. And in Matthew's Gospel, it is that the man says, "My daughter has just now died." So the speech of the man has been changed. It's not a major change, but it does have an effect. And it's a continual type of change that is made, where the miracles of Jesus become heightened. And this was pointed out by many Christian scholars, even some conservative ones. For example, Bruce Metzger, in his book, The New Testament, Its Background, Growth, and Content. So Bruce Metzger points out that if you go from Mark to Matthew and Luke, we will see that Matthew and Luke have enhanced the miracles so that Jesus appears, bigger and greater as we go. So in both instances, the girl dies, because even in Mark's Gospel, by the time Jesus gets there, the girl has already died. But you can see that the death was very recent. Whereas in Matthew, it's more of a done deal, because it was from the very start, when the man came to Jesus to plead with him, the girl was already dead. Whereas in Mark's Gospel, when the man came to plead with Jesus, the girl was still alive, but at the point of death. And so Jesus is going along, and then eventually the girl dies before he could reach there. And then when he reaches there, he says, "The girl isn't dead, she's only sleeping." So people might have believed him and said, okay, well, the girl was just in a kind of a coma or trance or a state of inactivity and whatever, and Jesus revives her. Suspended animation is the term I was looking for. So Jesus revives her from this state of suspended animation, but not that she was so fully and completely dead. But in Mark's Gospel, in Matthew's Gospel, she was dead from the start. So we go now to Matthew chapter 9, verse number 19, to continue the reading. Jesus and his disciples got up and went with the man. A woman who had been bleeding for 12 years came up behind Jesus and barely touched his clothes. She had said to herself, "If I can just touch the clothes, I will be healed." And Jesus turned. He saw the woman and said, "Don't worry, you are now healed because of your faith." At that moment, she was healed. When Jesus, okay, so let's think about this woman's story, and let's compare that with Mark's story. So Mark chapter 5, verse 27. The woman had heard about Jesus, so she came up behind him in the crowd and barely touched his clothes. She had said to herself, "If I can just touch his clothes, I will be healed." As soon as she touched them, her bleeding stopped, and she knew she was healed. At that moment, Jesus felt power go out from him. He turned to the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" His disciples said to him, "Look at all these people crowding around you. How can you ask who touched you?" But Jesus turned to see who had touched him. The woman knew what had happened to her. So she came trembling with fear and knelt down in front of Jesus. Then she told him the whole story. And Jesus said to the woman, "You are now well because of your faith. May God give you peace. You are healed and you will no longer be in pain." So in this Markan version, Jesus felt the power going out from him, but he didn't know where the power went. He kept asking his disciples, like, "Who touched me?" And his disciples give him a kind of a rude answer, like, so many people are crowding around you, and yet you're asking, like, "Who touched you?" Of course, people are touching you, like, from all directions. But Jesus kept looking around to see who had touched him, because he knew the power went out from him, and he knew what was happening. God was effecting a cure of somebody, but he didn't know who was the person. Until the moment, at least this is how the story is shaped. I mean, you can say maybe in the mind of Jesus knew, but he's creating this drama. But nonetheless, any observer would get the impression here that Jesus doesn't know who was healed, and the woman comes forward and confesses. And it's obvious then that God is using the power which is there in Jesus to effect the cures. So Jesus is just the conduit through which the power of God is healing people. He's not God himself. That's very clear in Mark's gospel. Now, in Matthew's gospel, he knew exactly. So, verse number 22, Jesus turned. He saw the woman and said, "Don't worry, you are now healed because of your faith." So there was no need for the woman to come and confess and say, "Yeah, it was I." There was no need for Jesus to ask people, who touched my clothes, because Jesus already knew. He turned, so it's as if Jesus, like you said, full control here, and he knows what's going on. He's on his way to become God. As we go from Mark's gospel to Matthew and Luke, and then finally to John, we see the status of Jesus rising. We see him being promoted more and more as having more power, more knowledge, and so on. He's becoming omnipotent and omniscient in the stories, not in fact. Then verse number 23 in Mark, reading from Matthew chapter 9, verse number 23, when Jesus went into the home of the official and saw the musicians and the crowd of mourners, he said, "Get out of here. The little girl isn't dead. She is just asleep." Everyone started laughing at Jesus, but after the crowd had been sent out of the house, Jesus went to the girl's bedside. He took her by the hand and helped her up. News about this spread all over that part of the country. So, yes, in both versions, Jesus heals the girl, but one might say, the girl may not have been completely dead. People at the time might have not being aware of CPR and other techniques, they might have just buried her and presumed that she had died, in which case she would really be dead, under 6 feet of earth. But Jesus obviously was blessed by God to apply certain techniques. He went there and he did what he had to do, and the girl was alive and well. Okay, we're coming to the end very quickly. Jesus heals 2 blind men. As Jesus was leaving that place, 2 blind men began following him and shouting, "Son of David, have pity on us." So I want to go back to Mark's gospel and see what Mark has to say about this. Because as I recall, in Mark's gospel, it might have been one blind man. I can't find that at the moment, and let us not be detained by that. So they say, "Son of David, have pity on us." After Jesus had gone indoors, the 2 blind men came up to him. He asked them, "Do you believe I can make you well?" So because there is this emphasis on the 2 blind men, let me see if I can find that in in Mark. Okay, I can't find it so quickly and easily, so I'll just leave the point alone. Um, In verse number 28, after Jesus had gone indoors, the two blind men came up to him. He asked them, do you believe I can make you well? Yes, Lord, they answered. Jesus touched their eyes and said, because of your faith, you will be healed. They were able to see, and Jesus strictly warned them not to tell anyone about him. But they left and talked about him to everyone in that part of the country. I'm still intrigued. I want to go. Okay, so it's so somebody's trying to explain this difficulty, and they say first of all, Mark does not declare that there was only one blind man healed. Matthew says there were two, and where there are two, there is always one every time. Matthew earlier mentions two demoniacs, where Mark and Luke mention one, which is in Matthew 20, chapter 8, verse number 28 to 34. So Matthew again mentions the two blind men, where Mark mentions just one. So we just finished doing chapter 8, and they're saying a similar thing is there in Matthew chapter 8. But what we will say is that clearly we have Mark mentioning one, a blind man, and presumably there's only one, because if there were two, you would think that Mark would mention two. So it's in Mark chapter 10, verse number 46 and 47, where it says, and they came to Jericho, and as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a great crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside, and when he heard that it was Jesus from Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. So there's a specific man, even given by name. But in Matthew's gospel, he becomes two men. So, why just heal one if you can heal two? And so we see in Matthew that the miracles are being dramatized. It becomes a greater miracle. Not only did Jesus heal one man, he heals two. The miracle is somewhat doubled. So then, if we go to Mark chapter 10, verse number 46 to 47, and because of the link, I can't tell which version we're reading from right now, but this is the English Standard Version, yes. Okay, good. So he says, have mercy on me. But I can't see the continuation. Mark chapter 10, verses 46 to 47. Let me look at the whole thing. What did they say? Mark chapter 10, verses number 46 to 47. So Mark chapter 10, verse number 46, and then, so the man says, have pity on me. Then verse number 49, Jesus stopped and said, call him over. This is Mark's gospel now, chapter 10. They called out to the blind man and said, don't be afraid, come on, he's calling you. The man threw off his coat and he jumped up and ran to Jesus. Jesus asked, what do you want me to do for you? The blind man answered, Master, I want to see. So notice the translation here in Mark, it is Master. But in Matthew, the translation is, yes, Lord. The two men asked, that Jesus asked the men, do you think I can heal you? The men said, yes, Lord. They answered. Now, it may be that the Hebrew word, the Greek word is kurios in both of them. But the translators are aware that in Mark's gospel, the term kurios could mean just simply master, Whereas in Mark, it's taking on more of the meaning of Lord because Jesus' status is being dramatized and overemphasized in Matthew's gospel over and above that of Mark. So Jesus told him, "You may go; your eyes are healed because of your faith." So Jesus tells him because he has faith, he is being healed, and one can interpret that as meaning that the man had faith in God and in Jesus as the emissary from God. And the same thing happens in Matthew's gospel. Because of your faith, you will be healed. So he tells the two men, and they were able to see. And Jesus strictly warned them not to tell anyone about him, but they left and talked about him to everyone in that part of the country. So here is the ironic thing, that Jesus is commanding them not to tell anyone about him, and yet they go on to tell everybody. It's why this secrecy on the part of Jesus. This is not so very clear, but some scholars think that this was a sort of invention by Mark. He invented what is referred to as the messianic secret, wherein Jesus is not telling people who he was. He's keeping that as a secret, that he's the Messiah. And why would he do that? Well, that could only be if Jesus, or one good explanation for that would be that Jesus doesn't want to stir up trouble. And he knows that once he declares himself to be the Messiah, some people might take him to be the Davidic Messiah, who would then overthrow the Roman rule. Once the Romans hear that he is claiming messiahship in that way, they would come down on the Jewish people with violence and persecution. So he's trying to avoid all of that. But of course, this all shows that he's not God, because if he's God, like, why would he be worried about what people will do on the ground, especially when he's right there on the ground and he can fix every problem. So something else is at work here. It may be that some factions of Christians got the idea that Jesus was the son of David, and it's only if he's the son of David he would be the Davidic Messiah. But he could have been a different sort of Messiah. He could be a priest, he could be a prophet, and yet he has no aspirations to overthrow Rome and take away Roman rule and give it to the Jewish people to establish the kingdom of God on earth. He may have just come to preach a spiritual message and then leave the people to do what they want with that message. So in that case, there would be no need for the secrecy. But once people got the idea that he was the son of David, as is mentioned in this story, the blind man or blind men are addressing him as son of David, then maybe that led to the further idea that he had to keep his messiahship a secret. Another explanation could be that Jesus was not claiming to be the Messiah, son of David. Well, it's the same explanation, but from in a different way. Jesus was not claiming to be the Messiah, son of David. And then the question is, well, how if we say now that he's the Messiah, son of David, how is it that we don't know it from Jesus? Well, the answer is in the Gospels that Jesus was keeping it a secret. And so the whole story is told in this way, that Jesus was keeping it a secret, but nonetheless, everybody knows it because the people who were healed went about telling everybody. Okay, I'll come to your questions and comments in a moment, but let me finish this and I'll try to finish it quickly. Verse number 32 of Matthew chapter 9. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, some people brought him a man who could not talk because a demon was in him. After Jesus had forced the demon out, the man started talking. The crowds were so amazed, they began saying, "Nothing like this has ever happened in Israel." But the Pharisees said, "The leader of the demons gives him the power to force out demons." Verse number 35, Jesus went to every town and village. He taught in their synagogues and preached the good news about God's kingdom. Jesus also healed every kind of disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he felt sorry for them. They were confused and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. He said to his disciples, "A large crop is in the fields, but there are only a few workers. Ask the Lord in charge of the harvest to send out workers to bring it in." So Jesus needs more people to preach his message. Nowadays, the people to preach the message of Jesus are Muslims, because we have the message of Jesus on all of the prophets in the Quran, and it is the duty of Muslims to spread that message, to teach it to others. Yes, the harvest is large and the workers are few. So let us do what we have to do to let that message get out there. Okay, so I'll turn to your questions and comments, and let me rearrange my desktop a little bit to get your comments more closely aligned with the camera, so I'm not always looking away. And so here we are. All right. So, I see lots of comments. Thank you. I like comments. But you know what that means? It means that I may keep you a little bit longer today than I expected. I'd planned for an hour, and it's already an hour. I didn't start dealing with your comments yet. Okay. So, Hamza saying, Salam Sheikh, how are you? Well, alhamdulillah, I'm doing fine, and lots of love to you as well, my brother Hamza. Hamza saying, Sheikh, have you considered going back to in-person debates? I personally find them much more engaging, and they tend to get a lot more views. Thank you, brother Hamza. I look forward to the days when those will come back, inshallah. And, I don't go seeking debates, very seldom. I mean, sometimes I have an interest in a person, and I say, can you arrange a debate with that person for me? And I do have interest in some persons still, but the time to go and pursue debates, I would rather study more and debate less. So sometimes, I spend a lot of time studying a point, if I were engaging in debates, I would be too busy. I wouldn't be able to study that particular point. So I like to study. And I prefer to study more and debate less. But if there were opportunities for me to debate in person, I would love that. But it depends on other people to arrange that. People who have like Islamic organizations and Islamic societies and so on in the university campuses, they can arrange the debates, and I'll be glad to participate. Hamza Sheikh, do you think it's better in our revisions of the hadith to reapply the Hanafi principles instead of taking the Western critical method, as they are essentially very similar, and thus we can stay closer to the tradition? Jazakallah. So, my brother Hamza, even the Hanafi principles are not so thoroughly critical according to the modern standards of thought and criticism. So the modern Western criticisms, it doesn't belong to the West. This is there are certain things that have evolved, and they're these are universal. They apply to everyone. So the technology, for example, we're all using the same technology. It's not only the technology that comes in isolation. It's the whole system of thought. Now, we can distinguish between moral and immoral types of ideas and thoughts and principles and so on. And moral principles or things which are morally neutral. So when we come to historical criticism, this is morally neutral. It's not that bad people will apply this. It's anyone who is thinking. You could be watching a movie and you're seeing the way that characters behave, and you're saying, well, this doesn't make sense because if this happened, this should happen, and so on. And sometimes it doesn't make sense at the moment, but it comes out later on in the story, and then you see a part which was hidden, and then they showed you that part, and a certain plot is revealed, and whatever, it makes sense in the end. But if the whole thing is not making sense, like people will go on the reviews and they'll say that this thing doesn't make sense. That's just normal. It's just human. It's just using the intellect that God has given us. So using that sort of intellect in a modern way, it comes with all of its developed forms, so like the ways in which we analyze and criticize reports and claims of historical narratives. So yes, we can apply the Hanafi principles to a point, but then even that breaks down, and we have to go to a further application of modern historical critical principles. It's inevitable, and it's not. It doesn't make one a bad Muslim to do that. In fact, it will be a bad Muslim if it would make us a bad Muslims to just simply take things that people have claimed about the Prophet, peace be upon him, without applying modern critical judgment to them. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us to what is best. Okay, so Hamza. Saying again, Sheikh, a continuation from last week's question regarding taking the Quran stories without thinking of them historically. Why should we just think of the stories and not take them historically? Jazakallah. Well, There are many reasons for this, Brother Hamza, but the basic thing is that if you understand the style of the Quran is not there to teach us history. Now you might say, okay, yes, but the stories may in actual fact be historical. Let's think about the creation of Adam, the way that the story is told in the Quran. One would get the impression that Adam is just formed from clay, the way that one is molding like a clay pot, and then the soul is breathed into him. But today, with our views on the development of life on Earth and so on, most people who are schooled in biology will not accept that. So if we don't accept that, then we're seeing here that what seems to be a literal description has to be taken not as a historical reminiscence, but it's a retelling of the biblical story to bring out the Quran's own teachings, and that's all we need to do about that. We need to say that this is it's not describing what actually happened in historical fact, but it is describing it's teaching us the lessons that should come out of that description, which was already there in the previous scriptures and already known to people. So the Quran is in a way saying those are the stories as you know it, but this is how the story should be told, at least in the present time, in 7th century Arabia, when people could not have understood, certain issues. So the Quran is putting the matter in this sense, and according to the stories that people already know, to draw out the lessons which they need to have. So the Quran, it's like two people coming out of they're listening, they were in a movie together, and they come out and they're saying, you remember that part? And another one says, yeah, but it really should have gone like this, and then we get this moral lesson from it. And it's like saying, you come out of a movie and it's the bad guys who win. And nowadays you have movies like that, like the Ocean's 11, I think, where the good guys are really the robbers, right? Okay, maybe they robbed the casino or something like this, but so you're saying it's not so bad because they robbed the casino. But nonetheless, if they were using deception and they were robbing in the end, even if they were robbing from the bad guys, somebody may come out from the movie and say, well, no, it should have been that the good guys are the ones who win in the end. If I had a chance to rewrite that story, I would write it like this, so that the good guys win. So now the idea in mind of how that story will be rewritten is not that we're going to write the true history. No, we're going to write the story, but rewrite it with such a twist that it brings out the moral lessons that we want to bring out. So that's to me what the Quran was doing there with the pre-existing biblical stories, telling it in a different way and saying this is how the story should be told, and then these are the lessons that come out of the properly told story. Okay. Okay, Dennis is saying, yes, verse 9 in chapter 9 made several people think that Matthew is not the author of the gospel account according to Matthew. Still, in literature, it is not so strange when someone writes about his own experiences in the third person, especially when the content is meant to help others. Yes. So, Dennis, I agree with you that the writer, like if he was Matthew, he could be writing about Matthew in the third person. In other words, writing about himself in the third person. This is not impossible, but that's if we find something with Matthew written in the third person and we knew that Matthew is the author, we would say, yeah, it makes sense. Sometimes writers do that. But if we don't know already that Matthew is the author, our presumption will be that somebody else is the author because Matthew is referred to in the third person. That would be a reasonable presumption. Now, of course, people presumed the opposite. They presumed that Matthew is the author, and it may have happened in stages. First, people said, "Oh, that's the gospel that mentions Matthew, because that's unique. Matthew is mentioned there," and then from that idea that that's the gospel that mentioned Matthew, people may have said, that's the gospel of Matthew, and then eventually took it to mean Matthew is the author of that gospel. So it may have happened in stages like that. Nowadays, scholars generally think that Matthew was based on Mark, and Mark was not a disciple of Jesus, and so it stands to reason that most probably the author of Matthew was not a disciple himself. Otherwise, he wouldn't be basing his account on what somebody else already wrote. He would give us his own recollection, and it would be very different. Okay, so Dennis saying, regarding verse 13, in Matthew chapter 8, verse 4, we read, show yourself to the priest and offer the gift that Moses appointed. In chapter 5, Jesus explained that the offerings are not accepted when you don't have peace with the brother. So it is much more important to be merciful. Otherwise, the sacrifice is useless. Yes, so I think I agree with all of that, Dennis. Let me just look at it one more time to make sure that there is not something that I am leaving unanswered here. Yeah, so if you make peace with those on earth and then offer your sacrifice, yeah. So if there were appointed sacrifices, yes, but that's not, the sacrifices are not so much what God desires. What God desires is that you be merciful to others, you seek the forgiveness of others, you repair your relationships, and so on. Okay, Hamidou Negu Sharif. Dr. Shabir, sorry if I mispronounced your name, my brother. Dr. Shabir, do you know that, okay, I never watch any of your live broadcasts, but no, okay, today I want you to pray for guidance for him to the truth. He's okay. Well, all right. Although there are numerous verses relating to Jesus as being just human, I'm going to suggest only one in the Bible that he should ponder over, John chapter 14, verse 28. So just to let you all know, I welcome everyone to join us and to offer their critical comments, and I appreciate Dennis's comments. And Dennis has previously mentioned to me, if I recall correctly, that he is a Unitarian Christian, which means that he does not accept that Jesus is God, and he does not accept the Trinity, so far as I remember. I mean, Dennis is here, and I'm speaking about you as if you're not here, Dennis, but forgive me for that. It's just that I'm, referring to this person's question about you. And I would encourage all Muslims to who join me here to be very sympathetic to and welcoming to persons who come to join, even if they're not of our faith. But what I'm describing may be of interest to people who are Christians. They may be curious to know how I'm approaching this subject, and sometimes they may feel that some of what I say is already what they believe. So we have to give people time, and we pray for everyone for guidance. I pray for myself for guidance. I do that every time I pray by saying, Ihdina siratal mustaqim, guide us on the right path. So I'm always praying for guidance for myself, and I pray for guidance for you all, for both Muslims and non-Muslims. And I know that you Muslims out there are always praying for guidance for yourselves as well. But let us be kind and polite to everyone. And I know you're polite here, Hamidou, but I don't want people to get the feeling that, if they show up here in our discourse, we're just thinking of converting them. So, we're just giving a view and offering a view, and then it's up to people whether to accept that or to reject that, and then it's between them and God. Okay, Joyce Taylor, assalamu alaikum, wa alaikum salam, my sister, and Vicky Sissoko saying, Doctor, my teacher, is it possible for you to offer a transcript of this talk? Please, it would be very helpful for study purposes. God bless you infinitely and forgive your sins and grant you Jannah, inshallah. So, my sister Vicky, I appreciate your comment and your suggestion. Maybe eventually we will get somebody to do that, but anyone out there can do that for me, and that would be great. In fact, we have a television broadcast called Let the Quran Speak, and we have hired some help to transcribe some of those into books, and we're in the process of getting those ready for publication. So maybe eventually these topics on comparative religion that I deliver here too may be transcribed, especially now these comments on the Gospels. So I can foresee that in the end, maybe I'll, rather than getting transcripts, I may just rewrite the whole thing. So we have just as we do with the Quran, we have the text of the Quran and then the commentary around it. We could have the text of the Bible. I'd use a translation of the Bible which is not anymore under copyright. And then go with the commentary around it as well, something of this nature. So that will be like the Muslim commentary on the Gospels, and I think that will be very interesting for people. Okay, and Dennis is responding by saying thanks for noticing that Shabir is my favorite Muslim besides Ali Atai. Thank you, Dennis, for those kind words. And Ahmed, and Dennis, you're always welcome here. And I hope I never say anything that makes you feel uncomfortable. Sometimes I do speak from a Muslim point of view, and I know you won't agree with me because I'm a Muslim, you're a Christian. That's a given. But hopefully, I will present my ideas with compassion and with consideration for the fact that I do have listeners who are not Muslims, and I want them to continue listening. Okay, Ahmed Abbas saying, Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shabir, why do the four Gospels unanimously portray the Jews as requesting the Roman authorities to kill Jesus explicitly by the method of crucifixion, which is not a lawful method according to Jewish law? It was not the Romans who... wait, I lost the place because I clicked to read more. Yes, it was not the Romans who chose crucifixion, but the Jews. In my humble opinion, this contradicts the way they are generally portrayed in the New Testament as people who have a literal understanding of God's law instead of applying the spirit of the law. Why not ask for one of the four lawful Jewish methods of killing? Example, stoning, decapitation, burning, strangulation. This would have ensured a swift death and prevented the risk of a curse of a man if a man is left hanging on a pole on Saturday. Surely one of the Jewish authorities would have pointed this out to the Sanhedrin. It all seems like a staged story to justify the crucifixion. What are your thoughts? So that's interesting that you've put it in such a stark manner, Brother Ahmed Abbas. In fact, scholars generally point out nowadays, academics that is, that crucifixion was not a Jewish method of execution, and the fact of the matter must be that Jesus was executed according to Roman means and under the aegis of the Roman procurator, and that the gospel writers are trying to come up with a drama to put the blame on the Jewish people, whereas in fact it is the Romans who did it. So this is generally what they come to, and it seems that you have come to the same sort of understanding in a slightly different way. So Matthew goes out of his way to make it certain that it is the Jewish people who become responsible for this. So he has the Jewish people say his blood be on us and on our children. So that's how it is. But of course, academics take it that it is the Romans who had Jesus crucified for their own reasons, because they took Jesus to be an insurrectionist. They're afraid that he is drumming up support for people to overthrow the Roman government, and so they decided to deal with him as a malefactor in that way, according to their methods. And now the Gospels are trying to place the blame on the Jews. Now, why might the Gospel writers want to do this? Well, we can see in some of the letters in the New Testament, in the Petrine correspondence, and also in one of the Pauline letters, I believe it's in Romans chapter 13, where there's a lot being said to placate the Roman rulers. The Roman rulers are being praised as, and this is very strange, because if they had just killed Jesus, why would you be praising them? And speaking as if their sword is the sword of justice and all of that. So it must be that in that environment, the Christians were without power, and they feel the power of the Roman government. The Roman government had already crucified their leader, and and they're afraid that their movement might be snuffed out if the Roman government comes down on them. So they want to put themselves in like show that they're in harmony with the Roman government. They praise the Roman government. They appreciate the Roman government, and they will support the Roman government in a way. Like this is how these correspondences in the New Testament put the matter. And so the Gospels seem to be following along a similar line. Eventually, the Christians, started putting out their story like this: that it's the Jews who they are blaming for the death of Jesus, and not the Romans. Because of course, if they're blaming the Romans, it means that there's a movement of people who are thinking who are saying that the Romans killed our leader, and then the Romans might want to come deal with those people too. Because if you think the Romans killed your leader, you might want to revolt against the Romans, and the Romans are not going to sit back and wait for that to happen. So it seems that the story evolved like this to put the blame squarely on the Jews. Now that doesn't mean that the Jews were entirely without blame. It could be that the Jews had no power. They also wanted him dead, and they knew that the only way to get him dead is to instigate the Romans to use the Roman method of killing him. They could not demand of the Romans that they would do this. There is a passage in the Bible somewhere where it says that in those days the Jews did not have the authority to put a man to death. I'm going to try to look that up. So, okay, so we have it, I can see in Stack Exchange that something like this is answered. So, So John chapter 18, verse 31 has it that Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law," that is according to Jewish law. But the Jews replied, "But we have no right to execute anyone." So they did not have the right. And so that's the verse, chapter 18, verse 31. Look for the commentary on that. So it would be pointed out that the Jewish authorities did not have the right to apply the punishment, to apply capital punishment at that time. So that could be that they wanted him dead, but they instigated the Romans to do the job for them. Now, of course, as you know, the Quran does not put the blame on the Jews for Jesus' death particularly. Quran blames Jews for killing prophets generally, but in the case of Jesus, it's وَقَوْلِهِمْ إِنَّا قَتَلْنَا الْمَسِيحَ عِيسَى ابْنَ مَرْيَمَ. As for their saying, they killed Jesus, the messenger, the Messiah, son of Mary. وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُمْ. They killed him not, nor crucified him, but so it was made to appear to them. Some commentators, non-Muslims in particular, but some Muslims are gravitating to this as well, to say, well, yeah, it's technically this is right, because crucifixion was a Roman form of punishment. It was not the Jews who killed him, but the Romans who killed him. So it's only their saying that they killed him. So they're culpable for their boast that they killed the Messiah, even if they haven't done it. Because to boast that you have killed one of the messengers of God, this is terrible. And they're blamed for the boast. It looks like they don't know that this is moral wrong. And that's what they're blamed for, not for the fact of killing him, because in fact they didn't kill him, according to the Quran. And God knows best about the details of all of this, but I'm so glad to have responded to your questions and comments, and I'm so thankful that you have joined me. And I'm thankful to all the people who shared the post. I see that Al-Hajj Abu Bakr has shared the post as well, and Brother Muhammad Mustafa, AAA apologist, and Abu Bakr Samaila. Forgive me if I pronounce your name. Thank you all for doing that. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all. Thank you all for being here. And help me in my mission, please, by donating for this noble cause. Go to our website, islaminfo.com, and that's where you can send us a donation for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. to help our mission. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all. Thank you all for being here. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bless you all and all of the people around you and keep you all safe from COVID-19 and from every other sickness and disease and stress and distress. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of the people around you and keep you all safe and healthy. May Allah bless the entire world, protect the environment, the plants, the animals, the people, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help all of those who are suffering everywhere from war and injustice. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in fact protect the Muslims who are suffering in so many parts of the world. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on the people who are suffering right now from the floods in Pakistan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on them and grant them relief. Brothers and sisters and friends, thank you all for joining me. Next week again, inshallah, same time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.